David and Emma looked at each other across the table. The young couple were happy. The food was delicious. The light from the candles was soft, and the music was perfect. David looked at Emma's beautiful smile. All the pain of his last breakup disappeared. All his doubts and fears about love had gone. His hand reached out and touched hers. "I want to ask you something." David searched her eyes. Could she guess what was coming? Her smile made him feel brave. She held his hand. "Don't worry. Whatever it is, I'll probably say yes." He felt so excited. He was about to ask the most important question of his life. From the corner of the restaurant, a strange man watched them. He sat very still at his table. He held a menu, but he wasn't reading it. Instead, his cold eyes looked only at the young couple. Back at their table, David suddenly felt nervous. "Excuse me," he said to Emma. He pushed his chair back and went to the toilet. As he looked in the mirror, he told himself, "Come on, David. Come on. You can do this, mate. She's crazy about you." Feeling ready, he went out of the bathroom. He almost walked into the extremely tall man who was waiting by the door. The man's eyes were a cold, bright blue. His face was pale with a sharp, pointed nose and thin, pale lips. "Oh, sorry," said David. "Which one?" the man hissed. He spoke with a strong and strange accent. David had never heard that accent before. For a moment, David was confused. Then he realized what the other man meant. "Oh, this one," said David helpfully. "This is the men's toilet." David went back into the restaurant. He reached for the ring in a box in his pocket. It was time to ask her. The taxi ride home was wonderful. The happy couple discussed their future life together. They shared their sweet feelings about each other. "The night I asked you to marry me," said David. "The night I said yes," replied Emma. "Just think, our whole lives together. Sharing, caring," he began, "loving, giving." Emma finished his sentence. They smiled at each other in loving excitement. "You are so wonderful," said David. "And you're absolutely beautiful," said Emma. "I've never met anyone so lovely and kind. I'm so happy I could sing." They entered their block of flats, holding hands. A tall man watched them from the shadows. "Which one?" he asked himself. He watched the building. He was waiting for a light to come on to show him which flat was theirs. 1 minute passed. 2. There it was. The light went on in a third-floor window. He saw Emma for a moment as she closed the curtains. How many times had he stood on a corner like this? How many victims had he watched? Many corners, many victims. His pale lips formed a thin smile. He moved out of the shadows to the door and pressed the buttons for every flat. The vampire was always pleased when people lived in flats. Sooner or later, someone always let you in. Silly humans. They thought you were someone's pizza delivery. It was a kind of invitation, and that was all he needed to enter a home. He climbed the stairs to the third floor and walked down the hall. He didn't make a sound. He could hear the young couple laughing and talking. He put his ear against the door. He could hear what they were saying, and he was happy. Young love made the sweetest blood. It was so full of life and energy. "I feel as if I'm in a film," she was saying. "More like a dream," he replied. "Yes, a dream. How lucky we are. Guess who I'll be dreaming about tonight," he said. "Who? Who?" Her hair smells of roses. She's like an angel. Their dream was about to become a nightmare, the listening vampire thought. Suddenly, he opened the door and stood there, showing his sharp teeth. The couple screamed and then held each other in terrified silence. The vampire could smell and taste their fear. This was how he liked it. Fear also made the blood sweeter. "There's my wallet. On the table there." "Take it," said David. "Take anything you want." "I will take anything I want," the vampire replied. "Fine, fine. We won't stop you, I promise," David cried. "You won't stop me, I promise," replied the vampire. The light shone on the sharp teeth. A terrible thought came to David and Emma at the same time. "Look at his teeth, is he a vampire?" "Which one?" the vampire hissed. "It can be only one." The couple's eyes were big and afraid, their mouths open in horror. They held each other's hands and their stomachs filled with fear. "Already tonight," continued the vampire, "I have drunk from 3. One more, then I can sleep and feel young again." The vampire moved towards them. Instinct made David step in front of Emma to protect her. Emma gratefully held onto his back. The vampire wasn't in a hurry. He had plenty of time. Who should he attack? He asked himself. Which one? "Thank you," Emma said quietly in David's ear, "for what you're doing for me." "Of course, my love. I'm here to protect you." He felt proud as he said the words. He could fight this vampire. All he needed was a piece of wood or something to push through the heart. He looked around for something. "You're so brave to offer yourself," continued Emma. "Sorry?" asked David. "What are you talking about?" "Oh," said Emma. "I just thought that with your love for me and everything." David and the vampire looked at each other. "Now listen, Emma. There is no doubt about my love for you." "Really?" she replied. She didn't believe him. "But you can't expect me to just give him my life." "I wasn't saying you should," she said. "It's just one of our options, that's all." "Well, think of another one," he shouted. "Why don't you offer yourself to him to save me?" The atmosphere in the room had certainly turned ugly. The vampire was not pleased that the fear and love were now silly, selfish arguments. Emma was very angry. "I hope you're joking. Let's see how strong your love is. What a horrible man. What about the woman I was planning to marry? Offering me to a vampire like a bone to a dog." "You said my hair smells of roses," she cried. All right, relax." David was a little embarrassed to be having this argument in front of a stranger. "I'm an angel, you said." She carried on shouting. "Must drink," shouted the vampire angrily. Ash came even closer. He wanted to make a quick kill. Then he could get away from these terrible people as soon as possible. His eyes opened wider and his teeth were bared. "Which one?" "Her!" David pointed at his future wife. "Him! Him!" screamed Emma in anger. "Please, him!" The vampire approached David. "She's younger, sweeter," said David. The vampire turned to Emma. "He's bigger. There's more of him." She pointed at David. Suddenly the vampire felt tired. He had been killing for many centuries. Listening to them was depressing. How could he feel good by drinking the blood of either of these disgusting creatures? He looked down at their terrified faces and shouted, "Bad blood!" And with that, he disappeared into the night air and left Emma and David alone together. Together, as they had promised, for the rest of their lives. Dr. Thomas Stryer looked around the control room at his team of scientists and engineers. He was excited and frightened, but he tried to seem calm. In a few minutes, they might start to discover something amazing. How the universe began. Thomas felt as if it was hard to breathe, but he counted to 10 and tried to breathe slowly. He sat at the main computer and started reading the information and numbers from his experiment. But he couldn't find anything to explain what was happening. He ran out of the exit with the rest of his team. He looked out of the window at the beautiful blue summer sky and tried to breathe slowly. "Ready," he said. He pressed the first button, and the complicated computers and machines came to life. "Set," he said. He pressed the second button and switched on the large particle accelerator that lay under the towns and fields of Switzerland. "Go," he said. And at exactly 12 o'clock, he pressed the final button. For a second, he felt as if he was blind because everything went completely black. Thomas shouted in shock, but the lights were already on again. That was not part of his plan. He had no idea what had just happened. "Everybody, check the systems," he ordered. But nothing seemed to be wrong with them. The particle accelerator was working perfectly. "Thomas," said his assistant, "look outside." She sounded afraid. The perfect summer's day of 5 minutes ago had gone. Instead, the sky was darker than the blackest night. But that wasn't the worst thing. The sun wasn't there, and the moon and stars were also gone. People were shouting and screaming. They started calling their families on the telephone because they were afraid they had all gone too. Until they were all outside the building. Everyone else in the building was outside, frightened and confused. They were using the screens and lights on their mobile phones to see better. Several people got in their cars and turned on the lights. They drove to the entrance to make a small area of light for everybody to stand together. The street lights turned on, but most people were still afraid. Then, almost 20 minutes after Thomas had started the particle accelerator, the sun was in the sky again. It was warm and yellow, and the black sky turned blue again. Everyone started laughing and dancing around, and Thomas felt as if he could breathe normally again. But later, hours later, when the real night began, no one was happy. Because, although the moon rose again, there were no stars in the sky at all. No one wanted to know what Thomas's work was actually about. They didn't care what the particle accelerator was for. What did that matter? All they cared about was what had happened after he turned the machine on. He had stolen all the stars, or that's what the newspapers said. And when they made him go to the International Criminal Court, they charged him with stealing the stars. Thomas said, "I'm not guilty." "Well, if you didn't steal the stars, Dr. Stryer," said the lawyer for the prosecution, "what did you do?" "If you're asking about my work," said Thomas, "we didn't do anything. We showed that the machine was working, that's all." "Taking the stars from the sky seems like nothing to you?" The lawyer looked around at the people in the court. "No one here would think it's nothing. No one in the world would think it's nothing." "That's not what I meant," said Thomas. "But I can tell you this. When the machine started, there were suddenly no photons in the test room." "What? Photons? We aren't all scientists here. Speak simple English, Dr. Stryer." "Light," said Thomas. For just a moment, it was as if there was no light in our laboratory. Then we saw it was also dark outside, until the light became normal again. Normal, Dr. Stryer? It wasn't normal when... The lawyer checked his notes. The sun went out for exactly 16 minutes and 40 seconds. Perhaps we can say the rest of the day was normal, but the night hasn't been normal ever since, has it? Thomas looked sad. I know, but you must believe me. I didn't do anything that could have taken the stars from the sky. So are you saying you didn't steal the stars from us? Said the lawyer. No, I didn't steal them, Thomas said. You just made it so that we can't see them anymore. After a long pause, Thomas spoke. Yes, he said. How is that any different? The lawyer asked. Thomas didn't have an answer, not one anyone would understand anyway, and if they understood it, they wouldn't believe him. He had an idea, but it would take years to prove it. Instead, he changed his mind and said, I'm guilty. Now the world could blame someone for what it had lost. But there was no point sending Thomas to prison for years. It wouldn't change anything. Instead, they designed a punishment, especially for him. They sent Thomas to work at the extremely large telescope in Paranal in Chile. Nobody used the telescope now. No tourists came to these high mountains to see the edges of our galaxy. No scientists asked for money to study the empty sky. All that passed through the night sky was the lonely moon and a few planets. Looking up made people feel bad. Thomas thought it was fair that they punished him, and the job was almost the same as prison because he was completely alone. After a few years, the world forgot about him, or at least everyone decided to leave him alone. Every evening, he watched the sun go down. The red ball was gone exactly 8 minutes and 20 seconds after it actually went behind the Earth. Thomas was almost happy to know that the laws of physics remained the same. Light still traveled at the same speed as it had always traveled. He hoped it meant he hadn't changed the universe that much. We know there is a speed light travels at, he thought, so perhaps the dark travels at the same speed. Of course, there was no way to prove his idea. Not yet. And alone in the mountains, Thomas had nobody to share his idea with anyway. High in the mountains of Chile, Thomas continued to watch the night sky. With the enormous telescope, he looked at the same place in the empty sky every night, even though there was nothing to see. And each day as the sun went down, he thought of the song his parents sang to him as a child. Starlight, star bright, first star I see tonight. I wish I may, I wish I might, have the wish I wish tonight. For 1,596 black nights, nearly 4.5 years, there was no change to the night sky. But that was okay. It didn't mean his idea was wrong. Thomas thought about the darkness he had created. He imagined it like a wave that had passed the sun. Now maybe it was continuing out towards the edge of our galaxy and further to the stars. It would take 1,596 nights to pass the nearest star. It will take 1,596 more nights for that star's light to come back to Earth. If the wave was real, of course. If his ideas were correct. If he was wrong, the stars were really gone forever. And then one night, 1,596 nights later, almost 9 years after that terrible day, Thomas looked up from his telescope. There was Alpha Centauri twinkling back at him from the night sky. The first star. He felt tears in his eyes, and he made a wish. And he imagined millions of other people were making their wishes too. Sergeant Frank Spike sat behind his desk and looked out of the window. Outside, cars moved slowly in the cold gray rain. He looked down at the gray hairs on his arms. his round stomach pushed against the desk. This was his final month before he retired from the police. For Frank, his last day couldn't come too soon. Frank felt angry as he thought about the money he would get when he retired. It wasn't enough money to pay for a short holiday on the cold and rainy east coast of England where he lived. It certainly wouldn't pay for holiday, a luxury round-the-world cruise. Just then, Inspector Spencer came to Frank's desk. Spencer had perfect white teeth, and he was always smiling. 3 years earlier, Spencer had been promoted. Now he was an inspector at the young age of 40. Frank wasn't so lucky. He had worked for the police for 40 years, and he was still a sergeant. Frank knew he wasn't as handsome or as friendly as Inspector Spencer. But Frank was a better policeman. Frank had a nose for crime, and Spencer didn't. That nose meant Frank could think like a criminal and solve the most difficult crimes. As a result, the younger man often asked for Frank's help. In fact, it was the only time Spencer spoke to him. "Hey, Frank, can I ask you something?" asked Spencer. Frank wasn't surprised. "Do you know who the Babingtons are?" Spencer continued. Everyone knew that the Babingtons were. Ronald Babington was the super-rich owner of Babington Oil, and his wife, Tabitha, was a model. Together, they loved showing how rich they were. They often appeared in magazines like Hello, with their beautiful house and their collection of cars. Last month, Ronald had bought an enormous diamond for Tabitha. The diamond sat in a large gold and glass case at the end of a long red carpet. There was an alarm system to keep it safe. Spencer continued to explain. "Someone told us about a plan to steal the Babington diamond." Frank tried to look as though he was surprised. Peggy, the owner of the Dog and Duck pub, heard 2 local criminals making the plan, Spencer said. "She asked us to keep her name secret, of course." "Okay," Frank said. He waited for the question he knew would come. "So?" Spencer asked. "What should we do? They haven't committed a crime yet." Frank looked out of the window. He remembered his retirement money. He didn't want to be alone in his retirement, but the money wouldn't even be enough to buy a cat. The sound of a car outside brought him back to the conversation with Spencer. He put his fingers together under his chin to look as if he was thinking. In fact, he was, but not in the way Inspector Spencer expected. "Listen, do this the clever way," said Frank. "Let them steal the diamond. If you catch them with the diamond, you can arrest them. No problem." "But Frank," said Spencer, "we would need the Babingtons to agree. And there are laws against trying to trick criminals like that, you know. That's why you let them steal the diamond. Then, as if by chance, you stop them for driving too fast as they escape. Search the car and find the diamond. You don't need to tell anyone that we knew about their plan, and they'll go to prison." Okay. Spencer was uncomfortable with the idea Frank was suggesting, but he knew it would work. Frank continued. "Of course, the officer who arrests them needs to be reliable." Spencer understood immediately. "Are you sure you want to do it, Frank? It could be dangerous." "I'll take 2 young officers with me. But yes, of course I want to do it." "Why?" asked Spencer. "You're going to retire soon. Don't you want to take it easy?" "That's exactly why I want to do it," Frank replied. "My last case will be my best." A few days later, Frank visited the Dog and Duck pub after work. "Did you get it?" he asked Peggy as she gave him his drink. Yes, I've now got a perfect copy of the Babington diamond, she said. I told the glassmaker I was a big fan of the Babingtons, and I said that my boyfriend wouldn't buy me a diamond of my own. You need a new boyfriend, said Frank. If I were your boyfriend, I'd buy you a diamond ring and take you on a long luxury cruise. Oh, really? She said, and smiled. Frank was sitting in the back seat of the police car. The car was hidden in a small road next to the Babington house. In the front seats were two strong young police officers. At 23:30, a message came in on the police radio. The thieves, a man and a tall woman, had met outside the Dog and Duck pub. At 23:37, they got into a car. The man started the car and drove away from the pub. At midnight, the thieves passed the hidden police car on the way to the Babingtons' house. At 0013, the woman climbed over one of the garden walls. A second hidden police team watched her climb over, while the man waited in the car. At 0020, the woman climbed back over the wall. She had an excited smile on her face. She ran back to the car. Smiling, the man waited for her to jump in, and then they drove away. Almost immediately, the thieves passed Frank's car. The young police officer in the driver's seat switched on the blue lights and followed them. Inside the car, the thieves were afraid. "What are they doing here?" the man shouted. "You said you turned off the alarms." "Relax, I did," she replied. "Remember, the police don't know what we've done. Just be normal. We can walk away from this with the diamond." The man stopped the car and opened his window. "Is there a problem, officer?" he asked. His face was red and shiny because he was so nervous. "You were speeding. We'll need to give you a ticket. Can you both get out of the car, please?" The man still looked nervous. One officer wrote the speeding ticket, and the other stood close in case they ran away. Frank began to search the car. "Hey, what's he doing?" the woman said. But she knew the game was over. Frank breathed heavily as he started looking under the seats. His hand felt something smooth, hard, and cold under the front passenger seat. The Babington diamond. He took the diamond and put it in his jacket pocket. At the same time, with his other hand, he took something very similar out of his trouser pocket. He held it up. "Okay, you two," he said. "You are under arrest for stealing this diamond." While the young police officers arrested the criminals, Frank held the evidence up for everyone to see. In the light from the moon, it shone every color. "Wow," said one of the young police officers. "I've never seen a real diamond up close." "Imagine if someone gave you that as a present," said the other. "Just imagine," Frank agreed. He carefully put it into an evidence bag. Half an hour later, back at the station, he gave it to Spencer. Spencer took it from him carefully, as if it was a new baby. 5 weeks later, Frank was sitting in his new armchair and drinking a glass of the best champagne. His expensive new cat sat at his feet. He picked up the local newspaper. The two thieves had got 6 years in prison. The photo in the newspaper was of the Babingtons. They were standing next to the diamond inside its new, extra strong glass case. Frank looked closer at the photo of the diamond. Only an expert would notice anything strange about the Babington diamond, and only if they saw the diamond up close. Frank put the newspaper down and picked up one of the travel magazines on his beautiful new coffee table. "Peggy," he said, "would you like to go to the Bahamas or the Maldives?" Peggy put down her own champagne glass. A small diamond ring on her finger shone in the light. "Why not both?" she smiled. "I did promise you a long cruise," he said. "You did," she replied. "I'm so glad I called you first, when I heard them planning to steal the diamond." "Me too, Peggy," he said. "Me too." Life now he had retired was a wonderful thing after all,